Welcome back to Cox Forum. Tonight we are talking about the fight against cancer, and in particular how the Relay for Life has been a big part of that, in particularly the last 25 years. Joining us in this segment is Dr. Anand Ganesan. He is an assistant professor at the University of California, Irvine. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And we welcome back Steve Bell, who is lead volunteer for Relay for Life, but very important is that he is also a cancer survivor, and there are more and more of you, thank goodness, around.
That's right. There's 11 million of us in the United States now.
What kind of cancer did you have?
I had colorectal cancer, diagnosed at age 35, which is very unusual.
I was going to say that's far before most of us are worrying about that.
That's correct, and so just my own cancer journey led me to Relay for Life. When I was better, I decided that that I wanted to continue to help in the fight, and I just didn't want to put it behind me. Why this Cancer Prevention Study 3 is so important to me is that although I can't participate in it, this is studying genetic factors, and that's what they believe was a key factor in my particular cancer. So that's why it's important. I can't participate, but I can have my brothers and my sister participate, and my father and mom. So,
one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit later is the incredible increase in survivorship in that particular kind of cancer. And one of the reasons is that it can be caught a lot earlier. But again, like I said, usually it's not looked for until people are 50 or older, and so it sounds like you were very fortunate to catch it when
I
you
was
did.
very fortunate, and where I should have done a better job is understanding that it was a form of cancer that ran in my family. So I should have, as the doctor will tell you, is that I should have been testing for colon cancer, having my colonoscopies at a much younger age than the standard 50, which is what they recommend.
How long ago was that?
It was 14 years ago next Friday, so I'm coming up on a birthday.
Yeah, that's pretty darn amazing. And talk about what you went through once you found out.
You know, I was very fortunate because I was young and in good physical condition at the time that I got through the surgery and removed the tumor, and then went through 7 months of chemotherapy and chemotherapy for colon cancer, depending on what stage it's in, is not as aggressive as some of the other forms of cancer. So I was able to live a pretty normal life and go back to work. So I was very fortunate. At times I felt a little bit guilty that I wasn't suffering as much as some of the other people that were going through treatment.
Doctor, certainly we still have thousands of people dying here in Orange County from cancer, but the advances in the past 20, 30 years have been remarkable, haven't they?
Yes, actually, I think part of that is related to some of the money that was put in to really look at genetic factors and to really sequence the human genome, understand variations in the human genome and how they relate to cancer in particular. So that's been one of the hallmark advances, I think, of the last 10 or 15 years, that we can actually sort of predict a little bit about who will get cancer.
Are there certain kinds of cancers that you know right now are more tied genetically than others?
That's a very complicated question. There's really two parts to that. I think part of it is related to environment and what you're exposed to. But then a large part of it's genetic. So I think in each and every cancer, you find that there are some genetic components and there are some components that are not genetic. And what's interesting and really provides an intersection between the two and tells you how important genetics is that a lot of the genetic advances we found by studying families, it turns out when you look at sporadic forms of cancer, they have mutations in some of the same genes. So.
Pretty interesting. Now, you're actually working on a research study that's been funded through the American Cancer Society?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. What are you looking at?
So our research focuses on melanoma. So melanoma, unfortunately, affects young people to a large extent. So it's the second most common cancer in people from the ages of 15 to 30.
Wow.
There are 69,000 new cases of melanoma just in last year, and one person dies of melanoma every hour.
And we're certainly in an area that would seem to be maybe have a higher incidence of melanoma than maybe some other places.
Yes, actually that's a good point. Melanoma is directly related to UV exposure, and of course in Southern California we get an awful lot of UV exposure. Now one of the misnomers is people think, well, UV exposure is just going outside in the sun and a tanning bed is safe. And actually they've shown conclusively that tanning bed use directly leads to increasing your risk in melanoma significantly. So it's important to avoid using tanning beds.
One of the things you mentioned again is, I mean, the incredibly young age that it starts to affect. I mean, 15 just seems like an incredibly young age, but particularly skin cancer. We're familiar with blood cancers affecting young people, but skin cancer at that age, that's pretty scary.
Yeah, it is actually very scary, and that's why it's really important. So I'm also a dermatologist in addition to doing cancer research, so I always stress the importance of getting skin exams. And as a dermatologist, and as most of my colleagues believe, you know, there's no mole that we won't look at. There's no mole that you have to consider that, you know, I don't think it's significant, I don't think I should get it checked out. They're all important. So it's important to get your moles checked early and reduce your sun exposure, particularly between the peak times of the day and the middle of the afternoon, and wear sunscreen of SPF 30 or greater, even when it's cloudy outside.
I can remember growing up, you know, we had SPF 2 and 4, and boy, if you really wanted to be careful, there's that 6 stuff. That was like, you know, it's like dumping yourself in a vat of white paint. But you now see it 35, 40, 50 or more. If you do, I mean, if you wear that kind of sunscreen, should you feel confident that you're okay being out in the sun, or is there still a risk?
There's still a risk, even if you wear that sunscreen, but you greatly mitigate the risks if you wear sunscreen. And the key thing I always tell people is, you know, they say it's waterproof on the container, but they aren't always waterproof. So if you're out, you go out in the morning, put it on after 3 or 4 hours so you have a second application. One of the questions related to this that people often ask is about vitamin D and if I get enough vitamin D. And they've shown that you can get vitamin D from a lot of dietary sources. That's not an excuse to go out in the sun more or use a tanning bed. The tanning industry has used that as a reason that you should tan, and that's not necessarily the case.
You hear that? Remember the term a nice healthy tan. Is there such a thing?
Well, in my view, probably not. But I guess it all depends on and what I always tell my patients is, say you look on TV and you see all of the people on Baywatch and all of these people running around on the beach, they have a nice healthy tan. Well, they get that in the studio. They get a spray tan. They don't go out in the sun because that also causes wrinkles. So.
That's something they don't want in their particular thing. Well, talk about what is your research particularly looking at? What are you focusing on?
Yeah, so what we're trying to understand is, so I talked about melanoma in the early stages, and the great thing is that if you catch it early, it's completely curable. Unfortunately, once it's moved and it's progressed beyond the skin, we don't have very good treatments for it. The currently available treatments only have a 16% response rate. And even the newest fangled treatments that we come up with, 50% of those tumors are coming back. So one thing that's very profoundly apparent about this tumor is it's developed mechanisms to be resistant to chemotherapy. And we really don't understand why that is. And so the focus of our research is to try to understand why melanoma is resistant to chemotherapy and how can we use that information to develop new treatments to combat resistant melanoma.
And your research is by far not the only research that's been funded by the American Cancer. There's been some amazing things. In fact, a lot of the Nobel Prize winners have been cancer researchers.
Yeah, I think I like to think about research proceeding in 3 phases. So there's the innovative idea phase. You come up with an idea and then you test it initially. Then there's the second phase, which is where you have the idea, you have some preliminary data, and then you test it even further to see how valid it is. And then finally there's the phase where you really test it and you translate it to therapies to people. And really it's the organizations like the American Cancer Society that are critical, at least in my case for sure, of supporting the first 2 phases of this research. And the third phase, a lot is supported by the NIH, but right now only 1 in 10 grants are getting funded by the NIH. The discretionary budget in the government is shrinking, so that's going to go down. And the success rate for new investigators like myself is even lower. So the fundraisers like Relay for Life and the American Cancer Society to raise money are even more critical now than they ever were before. because we're losing our best people. They're going and doing something else because they can't get their research funded.
So that was a nice segue. We'll go back to you, Steve. Tell us a little bit more again about the Relay for Life that you're going to be participating in.
Our event is in its 17th year, and it's the oldest and the most successful Relay for Life in Orange County. And so it's kind of neat because when our event first started, Relay for Life nationally started in 1985 with one man walking around a track for 24 hours. So people that say one person can't make a difference, Dr. Gordon Klatt is a classic example of someone who did. And our event has raised over $2 million since its inception. And we're just very proud of the fact that we've been able to raise a great deal of awareness in addition to just raising funds. Leading into what you were talking about, researchers in California last year, the American Cancer Society funded 22 researchers for a total of $63 million. And 3 of them are at UC Irvine. And then we also fund advocacy, patient services, and education. And some of our classic examples of patient services is the Road to Recovery, where volunteers drive chemotherapy patients to their treatments, and Look Good, Feel Better, in which cosmetologists that are volunteers show cancer patients how they can work with scarves and wigs and makeup during chemotherapy to help hide some of the side effects of therapy.
And again, this year's Relay for Life is?
It's June 4th and 5th at Saddleback College from 10 a.m. to 10 a.m. and our website is mvrelay.org. If you can't participate in our event, you can go to relayforlife.org and find out where and when the event is in your community.
Very good. Thanks to both of you for being with us tonight. And if you missed that particular website there, simply go to ours, which is www.cox3.com. Click on the Cox Forum link, and we will have all the information for you right there. You can also email us at any time at forum@cox.com. Next week, we invite you to join us as we're going to be taking a look at muscular dystrophy. That's all coming up next week, and we hope you'll be with us at that time. Until then, thanks so much for joining us here on Cox Forum.